And so it begins again. It's time to back up those saves and get ready because the latest I will back up my save build has released. It's time to take a look at build 41.66 and the multitude of changes and the fixes it brings across the entire build. Before we begin, however, I'd like to thank Foxfire for today's artwork, and I'd like to ask you to support the content with a like and a sub if you enjoy it. Now let's get started with the multiplayer focused changes, shall we? This part of the list in particular is a doozy, with a lot of fixes as well as new content added, but let's start with a big change. Now multiplayer servers have had their experimental count up to 100 players, with it still defaulting to 32 and a tick box that hides or shows high count servers with a warning. Keep in mind that playing servers with high player counts are likely to run like butt. Much like a Minecraft server that somehow has a player count of 500 but everyone's just stuttering and lagging. And a login queue system has also been added for multiplayer servers, so when you try to connect to a full server, you'll connect automatically when a slot opens up, with the queue moving up once that person's client finishes loading. With another server option added that determines how long the server will wait for the client to connect before they are timed out. Security-wise, there's been options added for automatic server backups, as well as security fixes to help keep cheaters from having access to the admin panels. VoIP has also gotten several improvements, such as there's now automatic gain control options, plus VoIP and text travels the radios tuned to the same frequency, with non-equipped stationary radios being two-way for text communications. Now the admin panel has some new options for creating custom safe houses and safe zones, which would be very useful for players who want to make a neutral ground, like say for markets. PvP icons have also been added. Speaking of servers, they now set a Steam server rule named PvP with a value of 1 or 0, which depends on the PvP option. This will allow players to distinguish between pure PvE and PvP servers. Speaking of, there's now also a sledgehammer only in safe house server option, which can keep people from being as griefy. So if you have the allow destruction by sledgehammer option enabled, this option allows destruction only in a player's safe house. And speaking of safe houses, there's been a pile of changes to the safe houses themselves and admins. Admins and moderators can now quit safe houses if they don't own them, or they can invite themselves to a safe house if they desire. And a fix has also been added that makes it so they won't show the quit safe house button if they're not in the safe house. A new property called build util set have construction has been added. And basically, if a zone has player built constructions in it or has been claimed as a safe house, it keeps loot from spawning in the area if loot respawn is enabled on the server. Several admin options have been updated, include the rain start, stop, and thunder commands, with several more being added such as lightning, start storm, and stop weather. And now when you gotta kick a player, there's an optional box to provide a reason, such as you were being a griefing asshat. Begone, thought! The add vehicle command now has the option to set coordinates for the vehicle, and server commands have had their text updated with a show options command to allow use by non-admins. Several doubled up commands have also been disabled, such as the add all to whitelist command and the add user to whitelist command, with several unnecessary options just removed entirely. Another fun change is there's several options added for overhead username display, which show first and last name enabled, it'll show the player's name to the world. But if you have display username enabled, it'll instead show their Steam name. If you have both options enabled, the game will divide by 0 and devour your PC, home, and you in a catastrophic localized black hole. Now actually it'll just show your character's name with the username displayed in brackets. The server ini file now has tooltips added for various options and settings as attached as comments. Server names and descriptions have been limited to 64 and 256 characters respectively. The night length option has been temporarily disabled as it doesn't function at the moment. And now the server will check and teleport players for safe house trespassing. And speaking of, now players should no longer become trapped when the safe house owner goes offline, with the option disable safe house when player connected is enabled. And some of the issues of players intruding in safe zones via movement exploits should have been fixed. And now the lucky and unlucky trait cannot be used in multiplayer as they didn't function properly. Some duplication exploits have been fixed. Now admins can properly access and change player inventories. The ping limiter should be working now. The admin powered debug text should be fixed. Now now low-speed car crashes shouldn't just murderize you and cause fatal injuries. Blackboxing also shouldn't occur for players who have passengers in a car anymore. Now crawlers shouldn't be able to teleport to players they target, now instead turning to target them. The defunct log local chat option has been removed, and now players shouldn't be kicked when a safe house is created. Also, a player cannot exit a vehicle that's in a safe house if they are not part of said safe house. Passengers should also no longer just become infinitely trapped in cars if you perform a medical check on them. And now if you bleed out in said car, you shouldn't be kicked from the server. An exploit has been patched that would allow you to bypass container item limits, and non-members can now not move movable objects in a safe house such as furniture. Admins now shouldn't make noise in ghost/invisible mode. The final multiplayer focus change is now players should be able to properly die around each other when your HP bottoms out. Also, not being able to move if you die while others are trying to patch you up. Now let's move on to the new content, shall we? There's been a decent pile of new stuff added to this build, so let's begin with an old button coming back. The toggle music keybind has been reintroduced, but by default it is not bound. If you wish to use this option, there's a new audio category near the bottom of the key binding UI. Now players can dismantle several player-built structures such as floors and walls. Honestly, this is a very nice change. Now you don't have to smash things with a sledgehammer that you just can't ever seem to find or burn it down. Corner pillars are now built automatically when you place walls and fences, so no more just tiny pixel or two gaps in the walls where the corner is. King's Mouth and the studio maps has also been updated to be more like the base map, with a few new additions and flourishes plus foundation and bed fixes. Have you ever added a bunch of mods and you're like, okay, where the fuck did this item come from? Well, now there's tooltip info that says what mod it's from. This can be disabled in the main options if you desire. Inventory container button size now has a display option that you can make them bigger or smaller for your own preference. The in-game survival guide has been updated, made into a single window, and it now works with controllers. And finally, there's a trait reset button if you want to scrap the build you were making and not just have to remove each option one by one. Now the blue washer and dryers function, you can swap between the two functions between a context menu to change the mode. Speaking of, the context menu should work when things are in your backpack list now. And there's also been more CDs and VHSs added, such as the Dog Goblin sequels. The crafting UI and craft tooltips have also been updated to display multiple choice item counts as well as heat requirements for recipe ingredients. There's also now a parameter to add frozen products to recipes and evolved recipes, and there's also 3 new food items added, with a focus on alliteration, that being pierogies, peppermints, and potato pancakes. There's also another property added called onCreate for item scripts. The in-game map has had a few changes added, such as a button that'll let you forget all map knowledge and remove all annotations. The mini-map is now hidden when the inventory and loot windows are visible while using a controller, so the mini-map doesn't overlap and eat your inputs basically. There is now controller button prompts added to the in-game map, and the map should also now be centered on the player the first time it's opened, and also when the mini-map is used. Now you shouldn't be able to move map symbols with the mouse. The game map itself's gotten a few new changes as well as some new locations like radio stations. The landscape has been tweaked and improved with various map fixes, plus radio masts and pylons have been added. But damn it, Indy, don't you know?
You must construct additional pylons. 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 Pylons.
Well, while old Kevin has a pylon-induced therapy session, let's move on to the new noise work changes, shall we? Now volume automation's added for the harder hearing trait, basically dropping the audio about a further 6 decibels on top of the already existing muffling. There's also now a new empty pan sound for when you empty frying pans, griddle pans, and roasting pans, though the sound is a placeholder. There's now values for when you hit doors with different melee weapons. There's also a new door sound for doors made of wooden planks. The stove timer will now ding when it's done. Now there's new sounds for building gravel and sandbag fences. There's also new sounds for turning media devices on and off, as well as muting and unmuting. Radios and TVs now have a dismantling sound. The generator now has a repair, connect, and refuel sound effects. There's sounds added for drinking and filling containers from a water dispenser. There's also a new climb sound for when you scramble your ass over a high fence. There's also new bullet impact sounds. And the violin has its own melee sounds for a hit and miss. Zombie voices have been lowered slightly for when they're very close. An occlusion has been added to vehicle engines, horns, and sirens. The foot stomp has also had its bassiness adjusted. And now the game plays the pour liquid on the ground sound effect when you empty paint buckets and such. Now the drink for the tap sound effect shouldn't play when you drink from a river. And now it plays the light fall sound when you trip over a hedge or a tree. And this just about wraps up noise work. But before we cover the big foraging update, let's take a look at the balance changes added overall, shall we? There's been some new balance and tweaks added to the game, including some quality of life changes such as when you set cruise control. It now starts at the vehicle's current speed, from which point you can adjust it up or down like normal. Now if you try to sprint but you're too worn out, instead you'll run as fast as your character can instead and have the walk and hold the run key. The M16 has its values turned off as experimental values now, so it no longer murderizes everything in sight. The greased back hair now requires hair gel. I kinda disagree with this, given how long our characters go without bathing. Their hair should have plenty of damn grease. Frog legs and whole fish are now dangerous to consume if they aren't prepared. Military lockers and crates can now be moved, and they now spawn loot, so that makes the military checkpoint even better. Now spawn items and starter kits have been unified in the Lua, and now drinking from the river or puddles will make you sick. But if you're already sick, drinking more tainted water shouldn't nuke you straight into the ground from orbit. Now sheet ropes can be used to craft stacks of logs. Now players will become bored inside player-built rooms and structures, and the agoraphobic and claustrophobic trait work inside player-built rooms and structures. Tile properties have been added to a large variety of items, and now the spear charge will only charge zombies in front of the player, and the sprint times reset when the spear charge occurs. This just about covers all the general balances, so now let's take a look at all the foraging changes, shall we? There's been a large amount of buffs and changes just to the foraging and search system alone, so let's crack on, shall we? Now there's a foraging tip system added to the investigate area window. There's also been some fixes to make the system more controller compatible. An overlay radius is now used instead of item radius for placing investigate arrow markers. The trait and profession multipliers have been restructured to use definitions, and now there's a profession and trait category specialization. There's also been big bonuses for spot categories based on professions, so I'm gonna go out on a limb and say if you're an electrician, you're better able to spot electrical components and such. Traits will provide a small or medium bonus depending on category, and now modders can add their own trait and profession definitions as well. Medical, ammo, and clothing categories have been added to urban loot. There's been a good pile of more miscellaneous items, as well as fruit and veggies added to the search as well. Now you can also forage up pine cones during the months of September to December, which can be used as campfire fuel. And now spotting arrows show immediately when the player notices something. Force Find now reveals an item nearby to the player instead of just moving it closer. There's also a new identifying system that identifies when you're close enough or from a distance with enough skill. Zone Display now reveals the exact category when you have a high enough level, and a minimum dark overlay value has been set so the search radius is always visible even in broad daylight. Certain categories will be positively or negatively affected due to weather or day and night conditions, with some categories being unable to be found at all or the likelihood to be found after weather events. If you forage too much and overload a bag's capacity, the game will resort to putting it in your main inventory, or failing that, it will drop on the ground. Light level values have been fixed for indoor searching, and another nice buff to umbrellas is the fact that using them while in the rain reduces the rain's impact on your foraging. The cap on how much weather and darkness affects foraging has been increased, and the bug that caused item markers to disappear if you look away has also been fixed. There's a chance to generate extra items on affinity sprites, i.e. you're more likely to find firewood in the woods or stones along the road. There's also now item ghosts that show before you spot the item, if you're in the visible radius for it. All the professions have had bonuses added to find something based on affinity, and cloud darkness and fog level visibility have been increased on Zone Display. There's also now a tooltip added to the Zone Display for effectiveness. There has also been some additions to the search radius, trait, and profession bonus info added to the tooltip, and now when you forage for mushrooms and berries, the game will show you if it's poison or not before you pick it up, if you have the herbalist skill. Back to the tooltip for a little bit. Now more categories will show if you have a high enough skill, and if you have the short-sighted trait, you can now equip glasses or reading glasses to remove the foraging debuff. Now the overlay cannot be toggled in vehicles. Wild crop seed spawn should be fixed with broccoli using the right type as well. And a wild plants category has been added for seasonal wild foods, with foraging and trait specializations added for wild plants. Now let's start covering the foraging balances, shall we? Foraging has had a rather substantial amount of balance changes just for itself, and I do mean a lot, to the point that some of them that weren't entirely relevant I didn't include here. Now if you're properly specialized, you'll have an increased possible spotting range. That being said, overall based XP rewards for foraging have been reduced. Icon density has been tweaked in zones, and insects, mushrooms, and herbs are much more common to find at night, with medicinal herbs being much easier to see and giving higher yields when gathered. Herbs and mushrooms also now more common in the rain and after a rainstorm. Search mode will automatically be disabled if a zombie gets within 1 square of the player. Headwear has its vision penalties reduced, with more types of headwear having penalties added. But hats will not ever have penalties associated with them. At least that's what Lemmy says. There's an increased chance of things to be found on affinity sprites, such as stones being found on stone paths. Said affinity icons can be moved again if they're not noticed. And the malice for item size has been adjusted to a curve to punish the player less. Item sizes have been rebalanced with overrides for spotting. Berry poison has been drastically reduced and is not likely to be fatal now, which is good given I had a stream character die from one single poisonous berry. Still kind of annoyed about that one. He still lives in mine and Ice's fridge. Mushrooms have also had their toxicity reduced, but they're still capable of killing you if you're unlucky. And another kicker is poisonous mushrooms and berries now come with a food sickness penalty too. Now there's an increased minimum vision radius for well-lit squares, and medicinal herbs have an increased variety of them, so you just don't keep getting, say, ginseng over and over again. Weather penalties have been increased for weather, with some tweaks also added for snow cover. The overlay radius was tweaked to use the forge system's min-max size values, and stones are more likely to be found on cracks in the road, and rates increased on roads, stuff like that. Some item categories have had their skill requirements removed, and when you forage a drainable item such as say tape or wood glue, the game rolls for the remaining amount. More affinities have been added such as say trash, junk icons, and insects. The chances of finding rotten wild foods has been reduced, and the chance to find fresh foods has been increased with high foraging skill. Profession and trait vision modifiers also affect the overlay maximum radius. The vision cap for extremely skilled and specialized characters has also been increased, with it being reduced for those who are too low of a skill and specialization. The vision radius bonus has also been made to ensure it always applies when you sneak or aim, and the profession and trait impacts of darkness have also been rebalanced. Dead animals are much more likely to be found stale or rotten, so aiming bonus also takes priority over the crouching bonus now. The chance to find logs has also been reduced, which is kinda nice because sometimes I'll just find log after log after log after log. Found like 5 logs in 2 minutes on last stream. Vision radius and view distance for spotting has also been rebalanced. The maximum hunger bonus for foraged food items that can provide has also been increased. Clothing vision penalties have also been adjusted as well, and spotting speeds for aiming and sneaking have also been increased. Snow cover and cloud penalties have been reduced, and the umbrella penalty reduction has been increased, but only applies to rain, not snow. Overall, this is all the most relevant changes done to the foraging balances in my opinion, so let's wrap this up, shall we? I'd like to start this section with acknowledging while there is still more to this patch, especially as this patch is quite a large one, but this video is already dragging on as it is. So I'll cover the other part of this patch in another video. That means the bug fixes, the split screen changes, modding changes, and controlling changes later. Personally though, I'm stoked to see the new foraging system getting further expanded and tweaked. I'm glad to see even more shit being able to be found in the wild and urban zones. Plus the map further getting expanded upon with new locations and detailing added all around. That's good shit. There's plenty to keep the game going and growing, like the new radio stations they've added with Radio Mast. Plus with the start of the profession slowly coming, that's going to be dope. Though I am concerned that the focus of specialization is going to make the single player experience a lot harder in favor of making multiplayer more varied, but either way that's fine as I like a good challenge. I've also heard other newer players complaining about Indie Stone's focus on adding more late-term content, which is something I just don't get. There was a ton of stuff to do in the early game. Just because you keep dying before you get to the late game doesn't mean that players who have put hundreds of hours in the game, or even thousands, deserve to get nothing to help keep them preoccupied and give those late game players more stuff to do. Keep playing, building up your skill, and eventually you'll be one of those players in the late game just wondering, what the fuck do I do now? I have everything I could want, and the only option is a vain attempt to clear out the map, and that's if you disabled respawns. So yeah, I'm pleased with the direction Indie Stone's going, and I look forward to seeing more of their work in the future. Before we end this, I'd like to thank all of y'all for your support, especially the members seen on the screen, who make it more viable for me to keep streaming daily and making these videos for you. If you'd like to see your name up there and also receive other benefits such as polls for our weekly supporter streams on Sundays, then consider signing up support in one of the places down below. This has been Core, and I'll see you next time.